Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Roxy and this is my YouTube channel where I plan on making videos about my experience with long COVID and being a late diagnosed autistic adult. In this video, I'll be talking about what to do if you see someone have a seizure. If someone is having a seizure, the first thing to do is to remove any items near them which they may hurt themselves on. For example, if there is a table nearby, then try to move the table out of the way so that they don't hurt themselves. This applies to any seizures which might be tonic-clonic, where the person might be on the ground shaking on the floor. This also applies to not just tonic-clonic seizures, but also other types of seizures where the person might be just staring. They may or may not have awareness when this is happening, and so it's helpful just to be aware of items around them where they could hurt themselves and bump into if they are walking about, or if they cluster and have cluster seizures, which means that they might go in and out of different types of seizures, including tonic-clonic seizures. This might mean that 1 minute they are staring and looking vacant, but the next minute they may have fallen to the ground and having a tonic-clonic seizure. So it's important to try to move any objects that might be around them which they might hurt themselves on. Or if they're on the road, in the street, try to stop cars from coming near them. I say this because seizures can happen literally anywhere. They don't wait just to happen when someone is sat down on the floor. They might happen while someone is walking. They might happen when someone is stood up. They might happen literally anywhere. So you might see someone having a seizure whilst they're in public, and they might be walking in the street and you might see them fall to the ground and have a seizure. Or you might be walking down the road and someone might be having a seizure on the floor in front of you. And if you're one of the first people at the scene, it's important to try to warn other people around you, including cars, that someone is having a seizure and to not come near them, slow down, or to stop. I personally have had lots of seizures in different places. I've had seizures at home, but I've also had lots of seizures in public. I've had seizures on the street, I've had seizures at a park, I've had seizures in the supermarket, I've had seizures at the gym, I've had seizures in a coffee shop, I've had seizures in lots of places. So if you're in public and you see someone having a seizure, it might be helpful to know what to do. The next thing to do, if they are having a tonic-clonic seizure where they are shaking and lying on the ground, it's important to ensure that the person is lying on their side where possible. Try not to have them lying on their back, and try not to obviously have them lying face down on their front. Please do not restrain the person or hold them down in any way. There is no need for you to hold on to the person whilst they're having a seizure. You just need to allow the person's body to shake and stiffen by itself. It might not be pleasant to watch, but holding someone down whilst they're having a seizure really can make things a lot worse. Ideally, the only time you really need to be holding them in any way is when you roll them onto their side if they are not already on their side. The next thing you should do if you see someone have a seizure is to time the seizure. If you remember to look at the time when you see someone having a seizure, this will be really important because you'll then be able to know at what point to call an ambulance. From experience of having seizures in public, my experience is usually people, the first thing they do is to call an ambulance. People usually panic when they see someone have a seizure, and so they will call an ambulance straight away. But sometimes it's not necessary to call an ambulance. Being able to time the seizure is important because if you need to call an ambulance, the paramedics will want to know how long the seizure has been going on for. This will affect the type of treatments they give to the person who is having the seizure. A seizure that is epileptic, that goes on for more than 5 minutes, at that point, an ambulance should be called. If the person has non-epileptic seizures, usually, but not always, an ambulance doesn't need to be called. If you don't know the person and you don't know if they have epileptic or non-epileptic seizures, it's always safer to call an ambulance anyway. Whilst they are having a seizure, you could check their wrist to see if they have a wristband that identifies whether or not they have epileptic or non-epileptic seizures. This wristband might also include any other important medical information you may need to tell the paramedics if you ring them. Some people who have lots and lots of seizures will have a medical bracelet to inform people around them if they to have a seizure in public, their medical information and possibly what to do. This wristband usually will say if their seizures are epileptic or non-epileptic, but not everyone who has seizures will wear this wristband. I personally don't have this wristband. In this case, it might be necessary to look inside of their personal belongings, such as their bag or their coat pocket, to see if they have a medical information card in their belongings. I know that this has happened to me whilst I've had seizures in public and people haven't known what to do. Ideally, it's really important to know if someone's seizure is epileptic or non-epileptic, because this will greatly impact the type of treatment that they will get from the paramedics. If someone is having a tonic-clonic seizure where they're having a lot of saliva come out of their mouth, one thing you could do is wipe the saliva away. You could also get the hair out of their eyes. If they have lots of hair in their face, you could gently get the hair out of their eyes. When I've had lots of violent tonic-clonic seizures where I've had a lot of saliva come out of my mouth and my hair has been in my eyes, I found it really helpful when someone has taken the hair out of my eyes and when someone has wiped the saliva from my mouth. For me personally, I have never lost awareness when having tonic-clonic seizures. My seizures present very differently in that sense in comparison to other people who usually will have lost awareness at this point. But for me, I've never lost awareness. I have altered awareness, but that means I know the seizure is happening and I'm very aware if there is hair in my eyes and I can't do anything about it. And I'm very aware if there's lots of saliva coming out of my mouth all over the place. So for me personally, I found it helpful if someone is able to take the hair out of my eyes, but this isn't necessary. If they're having a seizure and they're lying on the floor, whether it's a tonic-clonic seizure or a tonic seizure, then you could gently place something soft underneath their head, such as a cushion or a pillow or a blanket, or if you're in public and there's none of those things available, you could place someone's jumper or top underneath that person's head so that their head isn't hitting the ground beneath them. If the person is having a tonic-clonic seizure and they're on their side and the seizure stops, something you could do is place the person in the recovery position. If you're with them when the seizure stops, something you could do also is to stay with them and to make sure they're okay until they come out of the seizure. They may or may not know that they've just had a seizure, and so you could calmly explain to them that they've just had a seizure and ask them if they need anything. Some people, after having seizures, might be confused or might be distressed. This is possible after having a seizure. Often there is a change in mental state in the post-seizure phase. For me personally, it makes me laugh when people say to me that, oh, just to let you know, you've just had a seizure. It makes me laugh when people say that to me personally, just because I've never lost awareness whilst having a seizure. And so, although I don't have full consciousness, I do have altered awareness. And so for me, in my case, that means I am very aware that I'm having a seizure and what's just happened. So it sort of makes me giggle when people tell me that I've just had a seizure, as if I don't know, because in my personal case, I do know I've just had a seizure, but I know for lots and lots of people, they aren't aware that they've just had a seizure when they have a seizure. But I am also aware that if it were to happen that I do lose awareness and consciousness during a seizure, then it would be helpful for someone to tell me that I've just had a seizure when I come round, because I imagine it will be very frightening and it will be very confusing to suddenly come around and not know what's just happened. I will just say that if you can be aware that some people after seizures have a change in mental state. I know for me, I have a change in my mental state usually after having seizures. Sometimes I can be really agitated and confused. Sometimes I can feel very depressed. Sometimes I can feel really tearful. And other times I've been very aggressive after having seizures. And for me, that's just how my seizures present sometimes after having seizures. It's not the case all the time. And for me, in my experience, this has been more likely the case when I've had tonic-clonic seizures. I would just say, try not to take it personally, because it's not the person's fault. It's just something that can happen as a result of seizure activity. And with time, that person will return to being their usual self. You could offer them a glass of water after they've had a seizure, because some people might find that helpful. But I'll just say, please do not put anything inside of their mouth whilst they're having a seizure. Wait for them to come out of the seizure and ask them if they need anything. Also, something else that I don't think is spoken about enough is, for some people, they may have lost control of their bladder functioning. For me personally, this has never happened, but some people can lose control of their bladder whilst they have a seizure. And in this case, it might be helpful if you could discreetly tell them this if this happens, and perhaps offer them something to cover themselves for dignity and privacy, such as a jumper or a blanket. For me, it's never happened, but I know it can happen for other people. The reason why I say that it's really important to know whether or not someone's seizures are epileptic or non-epileptic is because treatments can massively differ as a result of this crucial bit of information. I know for myself personally, at the start of having seizures, when I was having lots of seizures all day, every day, and my seizures at the time were exclusively tonic-clonic, I've had some really truly terrifying and traumatic experiences as a result of medical intervention that occurred to me whilst I was having a seizure because the paramedics thought that the seizure was epileptic. At the time, I was having violent tonic-clonic seizures with my eyes open and lots of saliva coming out of my mouth, and I was shaking violently and my muscles were extremely stiff. I had altered awareness when this was happening. That meant I hadn't lost consciousness and I was very aware of what was happening to me whilst it was happening to me. However, because I couldn't communicate, because I couldn't speak, and because I wasn't in control of my body movements, I wasn't able to communicate this to the people around me. So the paramedics at the scene treated this as an epileptic seizure, and at the time it was an emergency because the seizure at the time was going on for more than 30 minutes. This, if it's an epileptic seizure, is a life or death situation. However, if the seizure is non-epileptic, giving life-saving treatment to someone who has non-epileptic seizures can actually cause more harm. It was not the paramedics' fault that they didn't know that the seizures were non-epileptic because it looked like epilepsy to them. It looked like I was in crisis. It looked like I was in a medical emergency where my life was at risk. But my life wasn't at risk. I was very aware of what was happening to me at the time. But ideally, I didn't need to go through the medical interventions that they were trying to give me because my life was not in danger in terms of a life or death situation. It's happened to me a few times when I first got sick, where unnecessary medical interventions were attempted to be given to me during the seizure because of the way it presented. Now, thankfully, my seizures do not present as violently as they used to, but at the start, for the first at least year and a half, they did. So I'll just say that if you know someone who has seizures, please find out if their seizures are non-epileptic or epileptic. This will be really helpful if you ever need to tell anybody, such as paramedics or doctors in A&E, what type of seizures they have. Because from experience, when you're the person who is having the seizure, who has altered awareness, and therefore you can hear everything that's going on, and you can even see everything that's going on, but you can't communicate or advocate for yourself, it's a really frightening position to be in. And so for me, what I've personally found really reassuring is knowing that someone I trust or someone that I know and someone who knows my personal medical information really, really well is able to communicate on my behalf. Because when you're that person who is in those positions having the seizures, you're left in a very vulnerable position, and it's helpful and reassuring to know that someone else can correctly hand over your medical information. If someone has been with me and they don't know me very well and they don't know my medical information, it's actually ended up being quite traumatic for me when they have not been able to hand over correct information to the doctors and paramedics. Me personally, I don't need to go to hospital when I have my seizures. I've had thousands and thousands of them. I'm so used to it. It's an everyday almost occurrence. And so it's not a medical emergency. My seizures, to my knowledge, are non-epileptic, and therefore they do not require medical intervention like an epileptic seizure would. There isn't anything the doctors can do to help me if I were to have a seizure, and so it's just something that I need to wait to finish, and afterwards I can take time to recover. However, I guess The thing is with non-epileptic seizures is people who have non-epileptic seizures can also have epileptic seizures, and even though you might not currently have epilepsy, it's not uncommon for people with non-epileptic seizures to also then go on to develop epilepsy. And this is where it gets a bit tricky, because I've always said to people not to call an ambulance if they see me have a seizure because it's non-epileptic and there isn't anything anyone can do. But actually, someone pointed out to me once, they said, well, you shouldn't say that to people because one day you might have an epileptic seizure and they won't call an ambulance. And if you've never had an epileptic seizure before, then an ambulance is necessary. So it's a bit tricky. I don't know how to navigate that one. But if my breathing was ever to be impacted whilst I was having a seizure, then of course an ambulance should be called even if it's a non-epileptic seizure. If someone is having a seizure where they are not having a tonic-clonic seizure, but the seizure might present where they're just staring and they look vacant and they're not blinking, they're not responding to you, then just stay with them until they come out of the seizure. If someone is having a seizure where they're staring, they might look vacant, they're not blinking, they're not responding to you, then ideally stay close to them and wait for them to come out of the seizure until they're more aware of their surroundings. Ideally, they need to be in a safe space and perhaps sat down so they don't fall to the ground or hurt themselves. Some people who have seizures cluster. In my case, I have cluster seizures, and this means that I can go in and out of seizures very rapidly within seconds. And so sometimes I might have a seizure and then almost immediately go into another seizure. And this sometimes is not always the same type of seizure. Sometimes I can have a seizure where I'm staring and looking vacant, and I'll come out of it only to immediately go into a tonic or tonic-clonic seizure. And so I guess in this case, it's important that I am sat down just in case that happens. And something else that I'll talk about, which I don't think is spoken about enough, is that if you witness someone have a seizure, if you can, to try to be mindful of what you are saying whilst that person is having a seizure. The reason I say this is because not everyone who has seizures loses awareness when they have seizures. In my personal case, I have never lost consciousness during a seizure. I think there is a misconception with seizures that just because someone has a seizure, they might fall to the floor, they might close their eyes, they might lose consciousness and not know what's just happened, and then they come out of it and are like, oh, what's happened? But no, lots of people don't always lose consciousness or awareness whilst the seizure is happening. I have altered awareness. This means that although I'm not responsive, I can't control my movements, I can't talk or communicate, I am, however, aware I am having the seizure. It's not the same awareness that I might have when I'm fully conscious and talking to somebody or in the way that I'm talking now. It's very difficult to describe. It's very difficult to describe what I mean by altered awareness. But it's like, in my case, it feels like my centre of gravity shifts. I'm not out of my body. I'm not looking at things from a bird's eye view. I'm very much in my body, but it just feels like something comes out of place. And when the seizure is over, then my sense of being goes back into place. It's very difficult to describe. It's like I'm there, but I'm not really there. I can hear everything when I'm having a seizure. I don't lose my ability to hear. I don't lose my ability to see. I've never closed my eyes during a seizure, and I've never lost my ability to hear during a seizure. And that means that my eyes are open, and so I can see everything around me. I can't move my eyes freely like I can now, but I can have my eyes open and see whatever is in front of me when I've gone into the seizure. I've also never lost my ability to hear anything during the seizure, and so I can hear everything that is around me whilst I'm in the seizure. I can hear what people are saying about me. I can hear any background noise, anything like I would be able to hear, like I'm conscious and talking now. I can hear everything. And so if you witness someone have a seizure, if you can, try to be a bit more mindful about what you might be saying whilst they're in the seizure, because you may think that they can't hear you, but actually some people during seizures can hear you. In my case, I can hear people when I'm in the seizure. I say this because in my experience at least, I've had some truly horrible things said about me whilst I'm in the seizure. I've had some horrible things said about my case and about my health whilst I'm in a seizure. I've had paramedics and A&E staff accuse me of making it up. I've had staff tell me that I should stop doing what I'm doing and that it's all in my control. I've had people say really not very nice things whilst I'm in the seizure, and it's been really horrible to hear those things being said about me whilst it's happening when it's not in my control and I can't do anything about it. Because believe me, if I had a choice, I wouldn't be like this. I wouldn't be having seizures regularly. I wouldn't be having any health problems if it was in my control or in my choice. Before I got sick with seizures, I was very fit and healthy. I had none of these health issues, and I was exercising a lot and I was going out a lot, and I was really excited to start living my life. And since I got sick, all of that has been taken away from me. And so I'll do anything to get back to how I was feeling before, when I had lots of energy and I felt really well. So if you can, just be mindful of what you say when someone is having a seizure, because you may think they might not be able to hear you, but actually they could. I think that's all I'm going to say in this video. If you like the video, please like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in another video. Bye.